is a huge displacement crisis which is resulting from the military operations in Northwest Frontier Province and the Fata region on the border. It is something like the fourth largest conflict-induced IDP population in the world currently. Around 2 million IDPs have been officially registered. There was already a caseload from last year of about 500,000, so 1.5 million were displaced in a very short period of time. And of course, we're not absolutely sure that 2 million is the right number, because there are some issues about registration, whether the right people have been registered or some people who should have been registered have not been registered. And that's a continuing matter of concern. 90% of those who have been displaced are not in camps. That means there's around 250,000 people in camps, but most are elsewhere, living, I say, either with host families or host communities or in schools. I mean, just to give you an example of the host community phenomenon, if I can call it that, I visited one of the villages where the village population is 1,500 and the IDP population was 1,200. And I visited one family who were looking after, a family of 7 who were looking after 95 relatives in their compound. And I think that's not untypical. So it's also been a remarkably generous response, partly for traditional cultural reasons, by the local population in parts of Northwest Frontier Province. But of course there are questions about how sustainable that is. In any case, this is a major humanitarian challenge, has been a major humanitarian challenge for us. And I think, and what I saw confirmed this, it has been a pretty reasonable response in the circumstances of the speed and scale of the displacement. The speed of the response has been impressive to get the basics of life to people there. Obviously the government, but also the UN agencies and the NGOs have been working there to make sure that there is food, there is shelter, there is clean water, there is sanitation and medical care and so on. Obviously there are significant issues with the humanitarian operation. There's a question of the heat in some of these camps, and I spent 10 minutes in a tent in one of the camps, and I could certainly see the problems. It was absolutely sweltering in more than 40 degrees temperatures, but we've tried to do what we can to provide shade between the tents as well as in the tents, but they are very hot. There's a lot of preparation going on for the monsoon season, which is about to start, and which is liable to cause flooding problems of one sort or another, particularly in some of the campsites. There's the problem of schools I've just mentioned, and the registration. And the other issue we need to look at for the future is how many more people will come out of other areas of conflict. For example, if there is intensified fighting in South Waziristan, as seems to be likely in the next few weeks. I said when I was there that I think this is a humanitarian crisis which is at a critical moment. And I said that because the issue now is how fast and on what scale will people begin to return home. It was perfectly clear from talking to the people I talked to in all the IDP settings where I visited them that people are desperate to go home. They don't want to stay where they are. They want to go back home, as people always do. The government's obviously very keen that they should go home as well, in order to reduce the burden on host communities and the financial burden in general. And we are of course also concerned that they should be able to return home as quickly as possible. What we've also said, of course, is that this has to be a voluntary process. There must be no obligation to return before people are ready. There has to be consultation with the people concerned, and the conditions of the places they're returning to. Those conditions have to be right. In other words, there has to be basic security there. Not 100% guaranteed, of course, because there's no way of doing that, but reasonable assurances of safety and other conditions in terms of basic services. In other words, the power needs to be on, the water needs to be running, the police force needs to be there, the local administration needs to be in place. And the main point there is that returns have got to be sustainable. The worst of all situations would be if people went back and then were redisplaced again, because that would create, I mean, not only humanitarian problems, but I think wider problems as well.